Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Chag Sameach. Yeah. It's too many things to keep track, Jeff. It's at this point, seventh day, So one of the things about the seventh day is that we always read, of course, Kriyat Yam Suf, the opening of the Sea of Reeds. And the opening of the Sea of Reeds is one of the staples of Passover. If you ever watched any of the Passover movies like the Ten Commandments or the Prince of Egypt, splitting of the seas right at the center of the epic adventure of the Jewish people, in whichever color or fashion we watch it, in whichever time. But there's something much more poignant about the splitting of the Sea of Reeds than it just being attached to the story of Passover. The Sea of Reeds, and what we read this morning from the Torah, define a very specific part of Jewish theology that sits at the core of Jewish identity. So, for example, the rabbis of the Talmud pinned the entire concept of the resurrection of the dead on Kriyat Yam Suf and of the song that Moses sings when the sea parts. In the Mishnah, in Masechet Sanhedrin, they basically say that anyone who does not believe that the resurrection of the dead is written in the Torah has no place in the world to come. So they're saying, if you don't believe there's going to be a resurrection of the dead, because mind you, this was never written anywhere in the Torah, or in the Tanakh, or anywhere else. The resurrection of the dead is a rabbinic concept par excellence. So if you don't believe that it's written in the Torah, you have no place in the world to come. But you cannot find it in the Torah. So how can you believe that? Well, the rabbi said, well, look at the way we interpret the verse, as the Ashir Moshe, and Moses will sing. Right? Moses and the children of Israel will sing. That means they will come back to life to sing this song. And if you don't believe in our interpretation, you have no place in the world to come. Well, that's one way of doing it, right? That they took care of making sure that nobody stepped out of the line. And that's how this becomes a central part of Jewish theology. But it's also one of the events that define our peoplehood. It is one of the events that turns us into a nation. It is one of those moments in time that no matter who you are, no matter whether you are conservative, Orthodox, Reform, secular, Reconstructionist, you know about the splitting of the Sea of Reeds. You know what happened. Everybody knows who Nachshon was. That guy who just jumped in, right? Because he had to tell everybody else that you had to have faith in God. So again, a defining moment in the story of the Jewish people, beyond just what we see in the movies or what we read about in the Midrash. And by the way, how did we cross the sea beyond Nachshon? What happens after he jumps into the sea? Well, here's where the first story for today comes. When I was at the seminary, at the entrance of the Unterberg building, there was a Chassid by the name of Mr. Gruber that will sit at the lobby of the building for hours to no end. And when you first got to the seminary as a student, you would see a Chassid sitting at the lobby of the seminary building. He was completely out of place. I mean, nobody understood, if you had never seen him before, nobody told you the story, why Mr. Gruber was sitting there. And you just thought he got off in the wrong subway station. But it turns out that Mr. Gruber sold books. He was a mocher sforim. And he, at some point in his life, discovered that he could sell many more books to the students at the Jewish Theological Seminary than at Yeshiva University. Because the students at the seminary were looking for the scholarly books. We were looking for the books that we're going to use in our classes with like complicated commentaries, books that were out of print. The students at Yeshiva University went for the books, the red books with the gold letters, right? All the generic religious books that you see in shelves. That's what they go for. But Mr. Gruber knew where his clientele was. And one day, and I kid you not, I have no idea how he learned my name, but I get off the elevator and he goes, psst, psst. So I turn around and says, Goodman, come over here. So I walk over to Mr. Gruber, and Elaine is laughing. Elaine can picture the scene perfectly. and he pulls out this book from his bag. He says, young man, do you know who Menachem Kasher was? I said, Menachem Kasher? No idea. Menachem Kasher, he gives me the whole story. Menachem Kasher was a rabbi who was born in Poland, and he just died about 10 years ago in Eretz Israel, and he was a scholar, and he taught at Yeshiva University, and he wrote the most incredible collection called Torah Shlema. Do you know what Torah Shlema is? No, Mr. Gruber. Torah Shlema is the Torah, and in every verse of the Torah, Rabbi Kasher wrote which verses of the Talmud and the Midrash commented on that verse of the Torah. So you can imagine it's a 20-volume set, right? And I was thinking, oh my God, he's going to pull out the 20 volumes. I'm going to have to pay him, because you couldn't say no to him. And by the way, he also discovered that students at JTS would pay him more than the students at Yeshiva University. That's why he was here. But he pulls out this Haggadah, right? The Israel Passover Haggadah, very, very ingenious name, by Rabbi Menachem Kasher. And this Haggadah literally sat in my bookshelf for about 10 years, until I got to Mexico City and I edited my own Haggadah. And the words of Mr. Gruber came back to me, right? He told me, one day you will use this Haggadah, because he has the most unusual explanations of anything that happened to Am Yisrael, he said. So take it. It's only $50. This was 1992, right? Okay, so here it is. So why is it an important Haggadah? In it, Menachem Kasher writes this commentary that he finds in a very obscure midrash, that when God split the sea, he split the sea in 12 different ways. So within the sea, there were 12 different paths. Why? So that each one of the tribes could follow their own path. Because each tribe interpreted freedom and the future and the past in a completely different way. And God had no right to make them all go through the same path. This is an incredible midrash, which tells you, by the way, a lot about the Jewish people. We are one people. But of course you've heard, whatever there's 3 Jews, there are 5 ideas. Just join us in a board meeting, right? Yeah, shake your heads. I mean, I'm telling you, I live through this nightmare once a month. So here's the bottom line. We are not a people of black and white, no matter what people might want you to think. We are not of black and white. We live in the gray area. There's more than one way to look at everything, always. So here's another story. Will be my last anecdote of the day, I promise you. These are the 2 bookends of my life as a student at JTS. I don't know why I've been thinking about JTS so much. When I went to my rabbinical school interview, they asked me, what did I think about the Siddur of the conservative movement, the Sim Shalom, which was new back then, and we didn't have in Mexico. And I said, instead of saying, we don't have it in Mexico, I've never seen it, I actually said, oh, it's incredible. And I think that every one of our synagogues should have it. We should all standardize with Siddur we have. We should not let any conservative Jew pray with anything else but Sim Shalom. And Rabbi Gordon Tucker says to me, so you think we all need to pray with the same Siddur, think the same, dress the same? I said, yes. He says, we're not Chabad. Jews are never like that. They were never like that. They will never be like that. Okay? And that's an incredible thing to actually understand. At the other bookend, in my professional skill class, they made me read this book, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And one of those habits is always be eager to understand others before you try to make yourself understood. What a concept, right? And this is what being Jewish is all about, believe it or not. If you've ever had a Pesach Seder in a Sephardic house and you're Ashkenazi, they give you all of this food, you think that you're in Gan Eden, right? You eat rice and beans and all sorts of candy. If you are Sephardic and you go to Ashkenazi house for Pesach, you think you're in hell, right? And if you go to a house where they eat non-gebrot, where they don't eat non-gebrots, like they don't use any matzah meal to bake. They don't even have matzah balls. That's double hell. So there's more ways than one to look at things. And that's basically what I learned from Menachem Kasher in this commentary. The splitting of the sea represents the path to freedom, but it was not a unified path. This is one of our national characteristics as a people, and it's important to understand it. I was studying this Friday morning with a friend in my study, and we were looking at the Ilchot Kriyat Shema from the Rambam, the rules for reading the Shema Israel. And the rabbis, according to the Rambam, say that you have to demonstrate intent when you recite the Shema. So nobody ever said you have to cover your eyes. But how do you demonstrate intent? Because then we learn that every mitzvah has to be done with intent. But how do you demonstrate intent? It's very hard sometimes to demonstrate intent. That's why people cover their eyes. They're showing the intent to concentrate and take it seriously. But really, what if I'm just doing this and underneath I'm singing a different song, right? So it is clear in every rabbinic source, in every book that was ever written, that we are not a people of one book and one idea and one way of doing things. That even in demonstrating intent, right, that incredibly basic concept, there's so many different ways of doing it. One of my pet peeves as a rabbi is to watch people in the synagogue, wherever I go, and to see what they do, right? You know, how they kiss a tzitzit, how they cover their eyes. Some places have things that I've never seen. You know, when we do Agvan Glilila and people go like this with a pinky. If I asked half of you why we do these things, you probably would not know. And I'm not dissing you. I'm just telling you the truth. My only advice is, if you're going to do one of these things, just know why you do it, right? Don't do it because the guy next to you or the gal next to you is doing it. That's not a good idea. I always remember the story that Daniel Friedman used to tell, that in his congregation in Los Angeles, the cantor would go and scratch his ear when he would say Velo Taturu during the Shema. And everybody in the congregation was scratching their ear, you know? So it takes a lot of courage to say, I do it in a different way. I believe something different. It's not black or white. But that's, by the way, one of the reasons why we celebrate Pesach and we observe freedom in this way. Freedom means that you're able to have your own ideas. Freedom means that this Jew doesn't have to think the same as that Jew or like that Jew. And that there is value in everything that we do. Let me just end with one of the most incredible lessons I ever learned about diversity within the Jewish community. I am a product of the conservative movement. I really very, very not often stray to the right or to the left. And I have a lot to say about the right and the left, as you know, from listening to me. One opening school day at JTS, when Dr. Ismar Shorsh was the chancellor of the JTS, he gave a speech, and it was just right after Boris Yeltsin took power as president of the former USSR. And he told the story of the 3 students that faced off with the tanks and were trampled by the tanks. And one of those students was a Jewish student. Now, for the first time in the history of the Soviet Union, now becoming Russia, they were going to allow a Jew to have a state funeral as a Jew. They were going to allow a rabbi to officiate at the state funeral of one of the students who died. He was a hero now. There was just one condition. The funeral had to be on Saturday. Wait. So that's how we all went, right? At the seminary, at the breakfast. And then Dr. Shorsh actually explained something to us. It was a Reformed rabbi who actually did that funeral. Had there not been a Reformed rabbi, that Jew would have never been buried as a Jew, and we wouldn't be sharing this story. He said, I wouldn't do that funeral. You wouldn't do that funeral. But that's why we are diverse. That's why we think differently. Whether we think it's wrong or right, that's not the point. The issue is that we're not a monolithic people. And then he said, and when we crossed the sea, there were 12 ways to get across. Shabbat Shalom u'mevorach.